The moment I realized people were watching me the way I had always watched them, I didn't feel smart anymore. I felt exposed. And honestly, I'm still not sure how to feel about it. My name is Daniel. I spent over 2 decades studying people, not in a lab, not with clipboards and surveys, but in the way most of us never bother to. I watched how strangers held their coffee cups when they were nervous. I noticed how people laughed differently when they were trying to impress someone versus when they were actually amused. I picked up on the micro-expressions, the subtle shifts in posture, the little tells that most people walk right past. I read every book I could find on behavioral psychology, social dynamics, cognitive bias. I genuinely believed I understood people better than most. And for a long time, that belief felt like a quiet superpower. I worked as a senior consultant for a mid-sized firm in Chicago. My job was essentially to sit in rooms and figure people out, what they really wanted, what they were afraid of, what they were hiding behind their polished presentations. I was good at it. My colleagues called me perceptive. My boss said I had a gift. I didn't argue. But there's something that happens when you spend years observing everyone else. You start to forget that you're not invisible. You start to assume that the lens only points one direction. It was a Tuesday in March when things shifted. We had a new hire on the team, a woman named Priya, about 10 years younger than me. She was quiet in meetings, took a lot of notes, didn't say much. I remember thinking, within the first week, that I had her figured out. Introverted. Analytical. Probably a little anxious in group settings. The kind of person who needed time to warm up before she'd offer anything of real value. I wasn't rude to her. I want to be clear about that. I was professional, even friendly. But I also didn't ask her many questions. I didn't pull her into conversations. I had already formed my conclusion, and I was comfortable with it. About 6 weeks in, our team lead asked Priya to present her initial findings on a client project she'd been quietly working on. I remember sitting back in my chair with a cup of coffee, expecting something competent but unremarkable. What she delivered was one of the sharpest behavioral analyses I had seen in years. She had noticed patterns in the client's team dynamics that none of us had caught. She explained her methodology clearly, connected dots that seemed obvious in hindsight but weren't, and answered every question with calm precision. The room was engaged in a way it rarely was. Afterward, in the hallway, she stopped me. Not in an awkward way, just casually, like she was going to ask about a file or a meeting time. Instead, she said something that I've thought about almost every day since. She said, "You know, I noticed in my first few weeks that you'd already made up your mind about me. I wasn't sure if you realized it." She said it without any edge. No accusation. Just a quiet observation, like she was pointing out that I'd left my keys on the counter. I stood there for a second and started to say something like, "Oh, I don't think that's," but she wasn't wrong, and somewhere behind my instinct to deflect, I knew it. I asked her how she could tell. She smiled a little and said, "You stopped making eye contact during my second week." Not in a mean way. Just in the way people do when they've stopped being curious. I walked back to my desk and sat down, and I didn't open a single file for almost 20 minutes. She had done to me what I had been doing to people my entire career. She had watched, assessed, and arrived at an accurate conclusion. The difference was that her conclusion was about me. And it was right. I thought back through the past 6 weeks, replaying moments I'd barely registered at the time. The way I'd nodded along in conversations without really listening. The way I'd shifted the focus of a meeting before she had finished making a point. Small things. Nothing anyone would write home about. But they added up to something, and she had seen it clearly while I was busy believing I was the one doing. That's when I started to understand something I hadn't expected to confront. All my knowledge about human behavior, all those years of observation and study, had made me perceptive in one direction and completely blind in another. I could read a room full of strangers, but I had lost the ability to really question what I was reading. I had started treating my first impressions as conclusions, my assumptions as facts. I wasn't observing anymore. I was confirming. There's a term in psychology called confirmation bias. I had known about it for years. I had explained it to clients, pointed it out in team dynamics, used it as a framework in reports. And the whole time, I was living inside of it without realizing it. The more you think you understand something, the less you tend to question it. That's not a flaw in bad thinkers. It's a pattern in experienced ones. Expertise can quietly become a kind of arrogance, not the loud kind, but the subtle kind that makes you stop asking questions you've convinced yourself you already know the answer to. Priya wasn't some extraordinary person with unusual powers of perception. She was just someone who was still in the mode of paying attention, the mode I had been in 20 years ago, before I started substituting pattern recognition for genuine curiosity. I started changing things after that conversation. Small things, at first. I started asking follow-up questions instead of nodding along. I started letting people finish their thoughts before I formed a response. I started catching myself in the moment when I felt that comfortable click of, "I've got this person figured out," and using that feeling as a signal to slow down rather than move on. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It didn't feel like a revelation in the moment. It felt more like noticing a habit I didn't know I had, the way you sometimes catch yourself holding your breath and wonder how long you've been doing it. Priya and I ended up working closely together for the next 2 years. She became one of the most valuable people I've worked with, not because she was the smartest in the room, but because she never stopped being genuinely curious about the people in it. She asked questions that other people assumed were already answered. She sat with uncertainty longer than most of us were comfortable doing. I learned more from watching how she operated than I had from most of the books I'd read. Here's what I keep coming back to: we're all building a model of the world in our heads. We build it from experience, from patterns, from everything we've seen before. That model is useful. It helps us function, make decisions, navigate complicated situations quickly. But at some point, without realizing it, we start to protect that model. We start selecting for information that fits and quietly setting aside what doesn't. We stop being students of the world around us and start being curators of what we already believe. I had studied human behavior for decades. And somehow, that very expertise had made me worse at one of the most basic things, actually seeing the person in front of me. The strangest part? I don't think I'm alone in this. I think most of us have some version of the same pattern, some area of our lives where our experience has quietly replaced our openness, where our knowledge has started to function more like a wall than a window. The question I've been sitting with ever since that conversation in the hallway isn't a complicated one. But it's one I find myself needing to ask on a regular basis. Who in my life have I already decided I understand, and what might I be missing because of it?